Welcome to Avenue Vineyard Community Church online teachings. Our prayer is that you would learn and grow through listening about the teachings on Jesus and the Holy Bible. Please come visit us in the Crystal Kids Youth Center in Edmonton, Alberta. Our address is 8718 118th Avenue Northwest. You can also download our free app from our webpage, www.avenuevineyard.com, to help keep you connected to our church family. Donations, tithes, and offerings can be made through our app and on our webpage. Thank you for listening, and God bless.
So as you can see this morning, I am continuing with this theme, the greatest, in all the message titles. This started weeks ago with the Great Pursuit, and then we had the greatest affection. And last week to kickstart Advent, we had the greatest song. And this morning, we're going to take a look at and reflect on the greatest strength. That's how we're going to continue our Advent reflections. And as we continue Advent, we do want to remember that this really is an intentional time to reflect on this greatest inspirational story, the Christmas story. And it's one of those things, again, where in some ways we're very familiar with it, but I do think that in many ways it can still surprise us. And as mentioned, this season is often marked by the Advent themes of hope and peace and joy and love. And these are all amazing themes that I think can and should inspire us for life with Jesus. In part, because I really think that this story reveals that, we talk about ourselves, wanting ourselves to be inspired by this story, but I think it's important for us to recognize that the whole reason we have this story is because Jesus himself was inspired. Jesus wasn't up in heaven watching football and thinking, gee, it's the end of the season, now what am I going to do? Oh, I know, I'll pop down and visit humanity for a while. No, God talks about this being this mystery from the dawn of time, from eternal, from so far back. This was part of the plan, and it culminated in that first Christmas. This was huge. Jesus himself was inspired. This was God's inspiration. This was the plan from, again, before the beginning of creation. It was huge. Jesus was inspired by his love for us. That's why he came to earth, because he wanted to be with us. That's why he's called Emmanuel. That's what it means, God with us, his heart aimed straight at us. This is the theme of the great story of Christmas. And last week, we considered some of the things that inspired us. We talked a little bit about inspiration, what it means to be inspired, how story can inspire us. And this year, as a way to kind of try and reimagine or maybe see it in a slightly different way, the big story of Christmas, we're also reflecting a bit on another story, this one, the Chronicles of Narnia, it was intended as a children's story, but honestly, I'm sure it's inspired many children. I think it's probably inspired equally as many adults who in some ways have probably been able to reconnect with some of their childhood imagination and inspiration themselves. And we're partly connecting with this story just as a way to understand the Christmas story through another story, trying to see the magic in the season, the magic in the story. And last week I started off with a couple of questions. What inspires you? What excites you or motivates you in life? And I want to start this week with some other questions. So feel free, if an answer comes to mind right away, feel free to shout it out. If you're not comfortable shouting it out, you don't have to. I am going to try and give you a little bit of time to think in between the questions. But here's the first one. When you think of that idea of strength, what do you think of? What images maybe come to mind? Images of strength that come to mind for you? Muscles like this? Probably not. That's pretty impressive for arms out scrawny. But yeah, strength, we can think of physical strength. But is it just physical? What does strength mean to you? Is strength good or is it bad? Yeah, it depends whose strength you're working on. Depends who's exercising their strength. Strength can be used in a bad way. It can also be used in a very good way. Now, for yourself personally, do you feel like you have it? Do you want it? And if you do want it, why do you want it? Maybe because you're sick and tired of stepping over that bag of flour that you dropped and you really wish that you could pick it up and get it out of the way. There's various areas of life where, hey, a little bit of extra strength would be a good thing. But how do we go about trying to find it? And that's not always clear. And it depends, again, on what kind of strength we're talking about. If you want physical strength, well, you're probably going to have to exercise your physical muscles. But what about emotional strength? Or what about spiritual strength? You can't do 10 squats to help you not be depressed or be a basket case. I don't know, maybe squats would help a little bit. But there are different ways that we sometimes need to exercise those muscles. And you guys can maybe think of different examples. When I was trying to think of spiritual examples, I was trying to find a story. And really the story that probably came to mind is some of you may have at some point in your life read Fox's Book of Martyrs back in the 90s after their Jesus Freak album, Christian rap group, DC Talk. They did their Jesus Freak Book of Christian Martyrs, which was I actually have the book, so I flipped through it a bit, read some of the stories. But there are some credible stories of even modern day people that were martyred for their faith. People young and old that were willing to die for their faith. And even just reading a couple of stories, it's like, wow, that is a lot of strength of character. That is a lot of spiritual strength. Now, consider one of our Advent readings from this morning. This really is one of my favorite Jesus passages, one of the prophecies, I guess, from the Old Testament. This is telling us about the king that is to come. You got to remember that at this point in the story, Jesus hadn't arrived on the scene yet, so no one had a clear picture. But this is how the prophet Isaiah, hundreds of years before his arrival, this is what Isaiah says this king, what Jesus is going to be like. And he says, look at my servant whom I strengthen. I think it's really important to notice right at the beginning, this is like God speaking to Isaiah, and he's saying, look at my servant whom I strengthen. Not, look at this guy that I'm going to send that's going to be amazingly strong when he gets there on his own. But this strength is coming from God. He is my chosen one who pleases me. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or raise his voice in public. He will not crush the weakest reed or put out a flickering candle. He will bring justice to all who have been wronged. He will not falter or lose heart until justice prevails throughout the earth. Even distant lands beyond the sea will wait for his instruction. And I think that's an amazing passage. Like, what does that passage show you as the character of strength? He's called a servant, and he's one that serves, and he's going to bring justice to the nations, and he does it in a gentle way. He's not going to shout or raise his voice in public, and he won't come in so hard and fast that he crushes the weakest reed. He's going to be sensitive to where people are at. Strength. I think we would all agree that we need more of it in one form or another, either in character, emotionally, physically, spiritually. We just need more strength to stand against struggles or temptations, to be more faithful in the various areas of our lives, whether it be work or school or other responsibilities. We just need more strength to invest in our varied relationships in the most healthy way. If you've you don't have to be alive on this planet for very long before you realize that sometimes people make it really hard to love them. Sometimes it takes a lot of strength, especially when you don't feel like you're being loved back well in return. We often need strength just to face the things that life brings our way. Things like a pandemic. You know, we didn't see this thing coming. We didn't think that it would last this long. I didn't. We didn't realize how much it would disrupt and complicate our lives. It's been wearying. It's been tiring. We need strength to get through it. I saw another article this last week, and honestly, I've lost track of how many articles I've seen on this topic, but it's once again reflecting on the skyrocketing increase of depression and anxiety during this pandemic season. This particular article was pointing out how tragic and hard it's been, particularly for teenagers. And honestly, I can't even give you accurate statistics on depression and anxiety right now because the numbers are changing from week to week. It is still climbing. Sometimes we just need more strength. And I mentioned last week that when C.S. Lewis started writing the Chronicles of Narnia, he had no plan for this story to be a Christian allegory. In the stories now, we can find a lot of great Christian truths, but they were just kind of birthed as he wrote the stories. He didn't intend to plot it out that way. And it started with one of the main characters, a fairly significant one, a strong one. Most people recognize Aslan the Lion. And in an essay that Lewis wrote titled, "It All Began with a Picture," he explains how the character of Aslan was developed. I found this pretty interesting. He says that at first, I had very little idea how the story would go. But then suddenly, Aslan came bounding into it. I think I had been having a good many dreams of lions about that time. Apart from that, I don't know where the lion came from or why he came. But once he was there, he pulled the whole story together, and soon he pulled the 6 other Narnian stories in after him. You know, for me, this is a great example of the many ways in life that God can surprise us and speak to us in ways that we weren't expecting. You know, Lewis was just playing with ideas, trying to figure out how to write this children's story, and then he started having dreams about lions. And the lion becomes the central character and a central image of huge significance in the series. Lewis was inspired by his dreams, and the result was the character Aslan, who happens to be a lion. And in many ways, this image of a lion gives us an understanding of strength and courage. Lions are strong. We see lions as having courage. They're associated with that. When we think of a lion, we think of veracity and tenacity. I couldn't think of any other descriptive city words. I don't know if you can. Veracity, tenacity. Any others? Simplicity doesn't really fit. Obesity, no. You don't want a fat lion. What? Yeah, that doesn't end in city. Regal city? I don't know. Ferocity. Hey, we got a winner. Ding, ding, ding. Yeah, you know, lions are this image. And you know, when we think of a lion, we do think of regal. We do think of majestic, something kingly. Lions are legendary for their strength and their beauty and for fearlessness. And this imagery, it's also in the Bible. Here's one passage from the Old Testament. It's from Amos. This one isn't a super popular book, but this Amos 3:8, the lion has roared, so who isn't frightened? The sovereign Lord has spoken, so who can refuse to proclaim his message? Now, you know, I cannot imagine, you know, being surprised by the roar of a lion, being out in the wilderness somewhere, not even knowing the lion's there, and then hearing the roar. most of you guys know that I am a hunter, and it's common when you're out there even by yourself. I hate when this happens. But grouse, those little birds are flippin' evil because their self-defense mechanism is to play stupid and stand really still until you're about 3 feet away from them, and then they fly away and their wings make the loudest sound in the world. And I remember the first time, it was one of the first times I took Josh, my oldest boy, hunting, and that happened. And Josh just about had a heart attack. He thought we were being charged by a bull moose because it's just out of the blue. It's this loud sound. Now, if a stupid little bird can scare you to death, can you imagine the roar of a lion? Who wouldn't be frightened? And it's with sort of that severity, that authority, that intensity, that power. When the sovereign Lord has spoken, it's huge. We need to take that seriously. Who can refuse to embrace, proclaim this message? And in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, Jesus himself, he's called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And the tribe of Judah over time has become a way of referring to all of God's people. And that would include all of us here in this room and those watching online. Jesus is our lion, our leader, our protector, our king. But does that image, think of God as this image of a lion, think of Jesus, this image of a lion, and now tell me, does this fit that image? White European Jesus, who I'm sure his hands are very soft. That does not quite fit this image of a lion. And often when we think of Jesus, we do kind of picture a mild and meek Jesus. He was a nice guy. He was gentle and kind with people. And he was, our passage that we read from Isaiah 42, he will not crush the weakest reed. He will not put out a flickering candle. That candle that's on the verge of going out, Jesus is going to be gentle. He's not going to snuff it out. But that isn't a complete picture. That is part of who he is, but it's not a complete picture. We highlighted a number of weeks ago that, again, remember, by trade, Jesus was a carpenter. And at that time, for a carpenter, all their work was done with hand tools, and it was hard work. It was hard physical labor. So in his time, carpenters were actually some of the buffest and toughest guys in the village. It was hard physical labor, and hard physical labor builds hard physical muscles. Jesus was likely a pretty strong dude. And although he was completely human, he also was God. He had the character of God. And as a result, he had this incredible love. And he had this strong compassion for people. Jesus had strength. He was incredibly determined. He knew what he was walking into, and he walked into it. He walked into pain and suffering. He walked into sacrifice with determination. And he had a heart for those needing help. He had a heart for the oppressed. He had a huge heart for justice. You might remember the story in John 2 where Jesus comes into the temple and he sees the money changers, and they're selling people animals for sacrifice, but they're taking advantage of people and they're making a profit on it. And it makes Jesus mad, because that's not what God's temple is for. It's not a place to separate people from God unless they can meet your monetary demands. It's a place to make it really easy for people to connect with God. And so he's mad. And not just kind of mad, he's stomping mad. It's a righteous anger, and he's mad. And the story tells us that in his anger, he doesn't actually act immediately. He leaves. And what does he leave to go do? To make a whip. Now, I don't know, he's, again, pretty good with his hands, but I'm sure it probably still took him a little bit of time to make a whip. That's not just something that happens in a minute or two. It took a while to make a whip. And in that time, you have an option. You can cool off, you can relax and get a hold of your temper, or it can solidify your resolve. And Jesus didn't cool off. In the passion of justice, he takes that whip and he chases those taking advantage out of the temple. He's using the whip and he's flipping over tables in anger. It was a premeditated butt-kicking, motivated, though, by love, by compassion, and a sense of righteous justice. Now, looking at that image, can you see that guy using a whip and flipping over tables? You know, our image of Jesus it's not always accurate. You know, and just think of the one person that you feel safest with. Think of the one person that you feel the most love and security with, and imagine them flipping over tables and using a whip. For most of us, I think that would be kind of shocking. And the fact that this is part of Jesus' nature, it's part of his strength, in some ways, I think for us that should be shocking. And remembering that at the same time, people were drawn to Jesus. And just imagine the way that they saw him. Jesus saw people that other people ignored. And not only did he see them, but he welcomed them with a twinkle in his eye and a smile on his face. He had this incredible way of receiving people in a way that they felt truly seen. Broken people were feeling warmth and compassion in his gaze. So he was loving and kind and compassionate, but at the same time, he was strong. He was courageous, and he was tenacious. And in the Lewis stories, we also get to see this in the character of Aslan, because at times with the children, he is cuddly and approachable. He lets the children hug him and play in his mane. They laugh and roll in the grass. But at other times, he is kind of scary. And there's this memorable moment in the story. It's in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And the four children, they are just learning about Aslan, and they're a little concerned because he's a lion. Lions are strong, they're intimidating. And they go up to Mr. Beaver and they ask him, is he safe? Is it safe to be around Aslan the Lion? And Mr. Beaver looks at them like they're a little bit crazy. And he says, safe? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. And it's the same thing with Jesus. He isn't safe. Sometimes meeting him, sometimes life with him can be dangerous. It can turn your life upside down, but in a good way, because he is good and all his purposes are good, and he can work out anything for good. So I think this is something for us to remember. I think this is something that we maybe really need to meditate on or dwell on until we can own it deep in our hearts. Recognizing that Jesus is this strong character. There is strength in him. There is courage in him. There is that powerful side of him that we don't always recognize. And then hanging on to that, realizing that the Bible talks about the life of Jesus being in us. The Bible uses weird language where it actually talks about how we can be in Jesus. So if he's in us, if we're in him, then we can share his attributes. We can tap into those parts of him, his attributes. In a way that we maybe don't fully understand, our lives are intertwined with his. He is at work in us and through us. Ephesians 1, starting at verse 19, puts it this way: I pray that you will continually experience the immeasurable greatness of God's power that is made available to you through faith. This power that's in Jesus, God's power in Jesus, it's available to us through faith. Then your lives will be an advertisement of this immense power as it works through you. This is the mighty power that was released when God raised Christ from the dead and exalted him to the place of highest honor and supreme authority in the heavenly realm. It takes a lot of power to bring someone back from the dead. That's God's power. That power is available to us through faith. It can be at work in our lives to bring healing, to bring renewal, to bring redemption. In Ephesians 3, verse 17, it says, by constantly using your faith, I think it's important to see this isn't just a one-time exercise of faith. It's not even, if it's occasional, you'll probably get some benefit from occasional. But by constantly using your faith, making it a more regular practice, the life of Christ will be, not it might, but it will be released deep inside you. And the resting place of his love will become the very source and root of your life. By constantly using our faith, there is something deep that we can tap into. Something deep will be released inside us. A life committed to Jesus and his ways means that he is at work in our lives and that God's limitless power is available to each of us. And I do think we need to ask or need to consider for us, is this a blind spot? Do we see this? Do we get it? Have we wrapped our heads around it daily, moment by moment? Do we remember to lean into this? The same power that raised Jesus from the dead is made available to us. That means that there's no reason for us to go through life dejected or defeated. We can grow and succeed and find strength for life through his strength in us. To recognize and embrace his power at work in us, I do think that there are a few things that we need to learn to see and understand, these blind spots that we need to address, truths that we need to grasp. And I think that one of these truths is that the life of Jesus in us, it draws out, that passage, it talks about something being released deep inside us. I think that the life of Jesus in us draws out just significance in us. It draws out our significance. We matter. Our lives matter. We can contribute something good and beautiful. And I do think that every single one of us, we need significance in our lives. We need to feel significant in some way. We need it. It is a life need, just like water and food. We actually need to feel needed. We need significance. I do think that need, it's been ingrained in us. We desire purpose. We need to know that our lives matter, that they count for something. Ingrained in us is in some form is the need for excitement and adventure. That has been one of the challenges, I think, during this COVID season. At first it was pretty awesome to be in your PJs all the time. But how long did it take before being in your PJs every day got kind of boring? Stuck to your house. Getting off your couch to walk to your computer. Getting up from your computer to walk to your couch. Pretty soon it felt like Groundhog Day, the same thing over and over again. And whether we realized it or not, I think many people started to lose a sense of purpose. I think that's part of what's contributed to the depression, the anxiety. What's the point? It's the same thing over and over again. Where's the purpose? Why get out of bed? It wasn't healthy. But I do think that something we see in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is that the four children, they don't start out in this way. They become heroes in the story. We see the progression. They bumble into Narnia. They weren't really looking for it, but when they get there, they find that the land has completely lost its significance. There is no significance in life because there's an evil white witch that rules the land. And this witch has made it winter all the time, but winter without Christmas. So it's dark, it's windy, it's icy, it's cold, and Christmas never comes around. Now imagine it being cold and windy and icy all the time, but no Christmas. No candy cane lane, no Christmas tree. We haven't decorated it yet, but we put up our Christmas tree last night, and there's something special about putting up the tree, the smell of the tree in the house. It just adds something special, festive to this time of year. Imagine no ice skating. Imagine no Christmas lights. No special time with friends and family, no singing, and no sounds of laughter. That would be depressing. And the way Lewis is telling the story, he's given us this picture of what life can be like without God. Like a never-ending, icy, cold, dark winter with no Christmas. But then in the story, there's a shift. There's this rumor that Aslan has returned, and it's just the beginning. But hope starts to grow, and as it grows, they notice that the frozen land around them begins to thaw. The dark spell seems to be broken, and the final proof that change is coming is that Christmas comes again. St. Nick returns, and they begin to celebrate. Christmas represents light and hope, and I think that Christmas can be that experience for us. Connecting with the story in that way can be that for us. It can be a light and a hope. The Bible story gives us a very similar picture. We embrace Jesus in his ways. We embrace his purpose for us and his purpose in the world. We embrace that and things shift. We glimpse meaning and significance and purpose. And adventure breaks in on our lives. We can experience this in many different ways. You know, sharing your faith with someone can be an adventure. It can be scary. Service projects can be an adventure. Community projects can be an adventure. We don't know how they're going to turn out. They take effort. They can be a little bit scary. The risky adventure of praying for someone for healing. You know, Jesus did that all the time in the Bible. We're invited to do the same, but sometimes it's scary to pray for someone for healing. Because what if it doesn't happen? Or what if I use the wrong words? Or you know, we feel inadequate on our own and we have trouble connecting with God's strength. Or even just hearing from God and sharing encouragement for other people, that you maybe think that God's spoken some encouraging words for another person, but it's like, oh, God, is that you? Is it me? Should I say it? I don't know. It can be kind of scary, but at the same time, it's an adventure. Missions trips can be an adventure. I was remembering the missions trip we did a number of years ago to Brazil, but it was an adventure. We arrived at the airport and our flight was delayed for hours. Then we had an unexpected overnight stop in Houston. It wasn't on the agenda, but we ended up playing basketball till late in the night with some strangers we met at the hotel. Then we didn't even get a direct flight to Brazil. We had to stop in Panama. And we had a however many hour layover in Panama where we, again, just met a bunch of new people. We finally arrived in Brazil after 40 hours of traveling, and as we get there, they greet us, welcome us, yay! And the very next thing they say is, Pastor Wayne, that's how they pronounce my name. They make sure they emphasize the E at the end, Wayne. To me, it always feels like they're calling me a whiner when they say that, but I am a little bit of that sometimes. Anyways, they say, hey, Pastor Wayne, you're speaking at church tonight in front of hundreds of people, and it starts in 2 hours. So, we've just been traveling for 40 hours. I don't have anything prepared, and they want me to speak. It was an adventure. And that was just the first couple days of nearly 2 weeks of adventure. You know, we trusted that was something God was leading us into, and it became an adventure. And I love how this passage is expressed in the translation in the Message. It's 1 Corinthians 1:9, and it says this: God, who got you started in this spiritual adventure. Life with God is a spiritual adventure. Life with God is supposed to be a spiritual adventure. Adventures are exciting. God, he shares with us the life of his Son and our Master Jesus. He will never give up on you. Don't forget that. Embrace the spiritual adventure. You guys are here today because of God's invitation to a life of adventure, whether you realized it or not. Now, just think of some of the images that come to mind when you think of adventure. Adventures are new. They're big. They can be scary. They take some planning. There's often risk involved. Adventures, some of your best stories, think of your biggest and your best adventures. Most of them have an element of near tragedy. You almost died, or someone in your group almost died, or something really bad almost happened. Maybe something really bad did happen, but you overcame it. There's epic stories. As time goes by, you tell stories like, remember when such and such happened? Or did you see that? There's something significant about it. Adventure brings anticipation of the future, living a life that matters, that makes a difference, a life that is engaged in something important, and we all need that. Life with Jesus is meant to be an adventure. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be sometimes risky. That's why John Wimber, who was a big part of the founding of our Vineyard Church family, he used to say that faith is spelled R-I-S-K. And really embracing faith, stepping out in faith, really is often a risk. because there's no guarantee that it's going to come to pass, that it's going to work out. If you're diving in head first, God will often challenge your comfort levels and often challenge you to step out of your comfort zone. So if we feel like our lives are lacking significance, maybe we're playing it a little too safe. Maybe it's time to follow the lion and take a step out of our comfort zones. Jesus lived his life with significance so that in him we could too, so that we could participate in something bigger than ourselves. And I know that, the team felt like that after our Brazil missions trip. I think that we can all feel that again. Jesus wants us to feel like our lives matter. He wants us to embrace adventure with him. In him and through him, I think we can find a deeper purpose and meaning. And this can at times feel really scary, but that is often because we underestimate how much of his strength is available to us. We rely too much on our own strength. We often feel inadequate on our own, and rightly so. But he doesn't ask us to embrace adventure on our own. He offers us, from the beginning, he offers us his strength. In the story, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the children, they find themselves in Narnia. And they soon recognize that the evil that is oppressing the land, they feel this call to do something about it. But they soon discover that by themselves, they're too weak. They can't do it by themselves. They need the help of someone who is greater than they are. They need Aslan the Lion. Most of us, I think, are somewhat familiar with the feeling of hopelessness, feeling overwhelmed. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to do it. But many of us, adults anyway, we're terrible at admitting this often. We're often terrible at asking for help. Why do we seem to think that God always wants us to be strong and competent before we come to him? Like, oh, I'm a mess right now. I can't go to God now. I got to wait till I'm strong. No. Maybe you're feeling weak in some area of life right now. Physical weakness is one thing, but what about just life weariness? Struggles that seem to go on too long and you feel like you just can't take it anymore. Maybe you're wondering if you're past the point where you can't handle it anymore by yourself, leading to depression. Life can be hard this way, working long, weary hours. For what purpose? Why am I doing this? Raising a family struggles, that can be hard. Relationships can be hard. The struggles that come with relationships can be hard, can be wearying. Health struggles can be hard. Remembering again, probably our family's hardest health season was, and it hardest for us because I think it was a time where the most tears were cried in our home. But when Christy's back was bad for nearly a year, we had no idea how long it would go on. We had no idea how long she'd have to endure. It went on for nearly a year of most nights crying herself to sleep. And initially you start out with all this, we're going to pray and whatever. But after praying for healing for close to a year and not seeing any change, it was really hard to even hope to have faith in prayer. It didn't seem to be working. And in that, then I felt useless. Like, what could I do? Nothing. It was wearying. It was tiring. Life struggles, faith struggles, maybe, struggling with your own brokenness, feelings of brokenness, feeling defeated over and over again. At first, you maybe thought you were strong enough to deal with it on your own, but then you find that you're weaker than you thought you were. And this is actually part of the Bible story. It makes it pretty clear that we all need help. We can't make it on our own. But that realization opens us up to the bigger part of the story. God never asks us to do it alone. He actually tells us that we're supposed to lean on each other. God often comes to us through each other. We're supposed to lean on him, and because he often comes to us through other people, we're supposed to lean on them. In the Narnia story, the great thing about the heroes is that they're children. And there's a simplicity about them. And kids generally find it much easier to ask for help. And in the story, these kids do. Grown-ups are a different story, often a bit more cynical or grumpy or just stubborn. But we can learn a lesson from the children in Narnia. We all need help sometimes. Aslan was their help. Jesus is ours. He offers us strength, and his strength often comes through better and stronger when we can own and admit our weakness. After pleading with God for quite a while, the Apostle Paul heard these words and he came to this conclusion. But he answered me, God speaking to Paul, my grace is always more than enough for you. It might not feel like it to you, but it is. My grace is more than enough. And my power finds its full expression through your weakness. When you're weak, your stubborn independence doesn't get in the way of my help. When you're weak, your hard-heartedness doesn't get in the way of my life helping. So I will celebrate my weaknesses, for when I am weak, I sense more deeply the mighty power of Christ living in me. So I'm not defeated by my weakness, but delighted. For when I feel my weakness, when I'm surrounded with troubles on every side and face persecution because of my love for Christ, I am made yet stronger. For my weakness, our weakness, becomes a portal to God's power. It's how we connect with it. And here's another passage that encourages us to look to God for help. I'm going to finish up with this. He gives power to the weak. He gives strength to the powerless. Even youths, the young and strong with energy to do anything, they also will become weak and tired. Young men, despite their youth, are also going to fall in exhaustion. But those who trust in the Lord, there's no age category here. Those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. This is a favorite Bible verse for many. Probably seem familiar to you this morning. It makes a really good bumper sticker or t-shirt. But do we really grasp it? Do we really understand it? Have we really absorbed this message, or has it fallen to the tyranny of the familiar? Who does God give strength to? He gives it to the weary, to the tired, to the worn out. How do they get that strength? Not by trying on their own. It's not given to those who struggle in secret without help. It's those that ask for help. It's those that embrace their weakness. It's those that turn to God, that rely on Him. The verse says that those who are strong, those who are young, those who have a lot of energy, if they try and do it by themselves, they are eventually going to collapse and fall too. They will find exhaustion. But those who, no matter how weak you are, if you will admit it, if you will embrace it, if you will ask for help, if you will wait on the Lord, you will mount up on wings like eagles. You will run and not grow weary. You will walk and not faint. His help, His strength given to us, maybe directly, maybe through the help of others. And I think that this is one of those blind spots that we often have that is going to take some good discipline to learn. It takes practice to be open to others, to ask for help. It's not an easy thing to do. It takes practice to tap into God's strength every day. Sometimes it seems like we think we can tap into His strength by going to church once in a while and reading the Bible quick at bedtime and praying once in a while before a meal. But it doesn't work that way. If I want to get stronger physically, it wouldn't work for me to go work out once a month. It wouldn't even do much good for me to work out once a week. In fact, the infrequency of it would probably end up getting me injured. My muscles wouldn't have time to get used to the exercise. I need to make it a regular, ongoing thing if I want to see results. 3, 4, maybe 5 times a week if you want to see good results. So it's the same way exercising spiritually to experience His strength in me. I need to spend regular time with Him. I need to practice being vulnerable with Him, engaging Him. I need to practice being vulnerable with other people. Because when we can see God in all things, I think we can find and experience His strength in all situations. That's part of the reason why, as part of our new church vision, we've adopted that challenge to try and find God in all things. To engage Him regularly, worship, prayer, Bible meditation, sharing with other people, praying together, other focused spiritual disciplines. That is how we get strong in Him. That is how we will get strong together. Because when we can see God in all things, we can just experience that strength in all things. Christmas is this awesome time, and I know that for some people it can also be a hard time. It can be a time where it makes certain things clear. It can make certain things really good, but it can also highlight how some things can be very hard. But in good or bad, it can be a time to remember that we do need to connect with God's strength. So as we continue to walk closer to celebrating the big Christmas story, I think we maybe need to intentionally consider, how can we look for God in all things? How can we more intentionally connect with him daily? How might he be inviting us to be more open with one another? I do have a homework suggestion for you. Now, some of you might have your own practices, Advent practices, as you get close to Christmas, a Jesse tree or Christmas devotional. Maybe you're reading something specific. But if not, just an idea, something you might want to throw out there is from today onward for the rest of the month, read one chapter of the book of Luke. The book of Luke, it tells probably one of the more popular versions of the Christmas story, and it really focuses on the life of Jesus, on his character. And it would be a good exercise in reflecting on who he is and what he's done and the life that we can find in him. So, again, as we take another step deeper into this season of Advent, I do think that we need to spend some time thinking on, meditating on, reflecting on what it means for God to be our strength, what it means for Jesus to be in us, for us to be in Jesus, for that grace to be available. So I'm gonna close, I'm just gonna pray, and I'm gonna invite God to speak to each of our hearts in the specific way that this might be significant to each of us wherever we find ourselves. Lord Jesus, we all probably come to you in a different space this morning. Some of us are probably doing really well. Some of us probably had a really great week. Some of us are, feeling quite optimistic and full of joy and hope and just loving what's coming. But Lord, some of us might have had a hard week, might be feeling discouraged, might be feeling hopeless, might be wondering if we're at the end of the rope, might not know what the next step is, might have a lot of unanswered questions. Jesus, this is a season where we can be encouraged in the story of you. Again, Lord, your heart for us, your life in us. Jesus, you never ask us to be strong on our own, ever. Never, ever, ever do you ask us to be strong on our own. You make it very clear that that is not the best way forward. We are supposed to lean hard into you, Jesus. We are supposed to lean hard into your grace. You've given us faith so that we can reach for that. And Lord, you call us to lean hard into one another, to embrace the humility to ask for help, to be able to share our difficulties with one another, to ask for prayer, to ask for practical help. Lord, you often work in and through us for the benefit of us. Jesus, that is part of the spirit of Christmas. It's part of your story. Jesus, in the space that we find ourselves this morning, what does this Christmas story mean to us? How should it inspire us? How should it encourage us? How should it strengthen us?